Accidental Talmudist wisdom you don't want to miss. Ancient light that shines on today. All his life he'd break the rules, cause he never had the tools, till the Talmud grabbed him that great day, showed him the way. Accidental Talmudist wisdom you don't want to miss. Now my pal Sal, take it away.
My guest today is Gedaliah Gurfein, creator of The People's Talmud. He's a good friend and a fellow enthusiast, shall we say, for the wisdom of the Jewish people collected over the centuries and millennia in the Talmud. And also my partner in crime, shall we say, in making the Talmud accessible without dumbing it down to a worldwide audience. You're going to love hearing about the People's Talmud, what it is, how it works, and we're going to share a bunch of great stories and pearls of wisdom from the Talmud. Enjoy. Gedaliah, it's great to have you on the Accidental Talmudist podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You and I share a deep and passionate interest in the Talmud, which I've expressed through the Accidental Talmudist platform, and you've expressed through the People's Talmud. So please tell us, how did that come to be?
The bottom line of People's Talmud was to create a facility that enabled intelligent people lacking skills and even interest in the Talmud to find a place that spoke their vernacular in a comfortable situation without agendas, and a chance for them to really enter the world of timeless wisdom.
And would you say that this is for Jews only?
I might have said that originally, but at this point, like, our number one user until about 3 months ago was from Beijing, China. So we have people from Igbo, from Africa. You know, look, there's only one God. We're all family. So everyone, welcome aboard. Wisdom will only help all of us.
Yeah, I will say exactly the same thing on Accidental Talmudist. We have so many people who are expressing profound interest. I mean, I teach a Daf Yomi Shir, and many of my students are not Jewish, but they're very serious about learning about God, learning about history, learning about scripture, and learning from this oldest and most continuous, wisdom tradition that's out there in the kind of rigorous manner that has been expressed over the millennia. But for our listeners who don't know so much about the Talmud and what it is, why don't we start? What is the Talmud?
Okay, I like seeing the ball come over the net like that. Well, the Talmud actually is an interesting word in and of itself. On the one hand, it can actually mean scholarship, and on the other hand, it can also mean the scholar, the student, who's actually like a Talmud Hacham is not a wise man, it's one who's a student of wisdom. So every student of wisdom is somebody who our basic DNA is wisdom, and therefore when we have an opportunity to learn and to grow, especially in spiritual matters, these things will impact us and elevate us. So I think the Talmud becomes the operating system, the OS, from which every aspect of Judaism, from philosophy to mysticism to how to make homemade mustard, how to have a happy marriage, it's all there because it's all within the category of creation.
Yeah, and let's go back a little bit to the origin of it. And perhaps you could share with our listeners what the Torah Shebaal Peh is, what the oral Torah is in the Jewish tradition.
Well, of course. The oral tradition is that aspect which is uniquely Jewish. Those things, as we identify women lighting candles on Shabbat, only appears in the Talmud. And so therefore it was part and parcel of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, which simultaneously came in a written and an oral form. The oral form was supposed to have remained oral, but over many, many years and different challenges, both internally and externally, there was fear that diaspora might be setting in, splitting of feelings and where you lived and so on. There needed a certain unified position. That was created by Rebbe in what we know as the Mishnah. But through, again, a period of time, what exactly was the Mishnah no longer was clear. So the Talmud came to explain the Mishnah. Actually, Mishnah and Talmud together, a capital T, is the Talmud. The first of that was called the Jerusalem Talmud. It was only many hundred years later that the Babylonian Talmud became the seal of the Talmud, at which point future authors would no longer be categorized as Amoraim, the people involved in the writing of the Talmud.
Right, and I would also add that the Jerusalem Talmud was never completed, while the Babylonian Talmud was, at least in part because of the fierce Roman oppression. The Jerusalem Talmud was being created under the Roman occupation. The sages were not free to learn and teach Torah in the same way that the sages located in the Babylonian Jewish community, which at that point was part of the Persian Empire, had that greater freedom. There was certainly communication between the two communities, thanks in no small part to Ula, the great sage Ula, who would make his trips back and forth. But the seeds of the oral Torah go all the way back to Mount Sinai, right? Certain instructions were given to Moses, not in writing, and by design, not in writing, because if that written document was going to remain forever relevant and fresh, there was going to have to be a kind of organized system for the sages in every generation to answer the new questions that would inevitably come up. And I would say that that's a big part of the oral tradition as well.
Right. I mean, again, there were a few hundred years there between the Jerusalem and the Babylonian. So not all the people who were involved in Jerusalem were still alive by the time the Babylonian was being assembled.
But when it was being redacted, yeah, for sure.
Right.
And then what's so great, and that's why I think it's so special that you've got a project, and project is such an inadequate word for what the People's Talmud is. This massive, overflowing, ever-flowing fountain of wisdom, always growing, always regenerating itself. But one thing that's so beautiful about that is that the Talmud was not accessible. Not only was it not so accessible beyond the Jewish community, it wasn't even so accessible to all Jews within the Jewish people, because there was I wouldn't call it elitism, but it just required so much learning to open it up and to understand what was being said and where it was coming from. And while we always had, I think, this valorization of scholarship in our community, and that every community would, long to and work towards sending its greatest scholars, to the centers of Talmud learning, a lot of people were just left out. And I think that one of the one of the joys of modern Judaism is that it has become accessible to so many more people. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about first that evolution of how it became more accessible before our time, in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, and then how the People's Talmud took that to a whole other level.
Right. Well, I just have to say you nailed the name. That's the whole idea. The people and the Talmud now finally coming together. It was based on exactly what you had said. So, I'm happy to share what I want to say, but I'm afraid it might not be coming from the same channel that is normally broadcasted in other parts of the world. So I mean to say that from a real Torah perspective, there is this concept called Yeridat, which I know you know, called Yeridot HaDorot, the weakening of the spiritual capability. Whereas if you go back to the days of Jacob, Yaakov studying in the yeshiva of Shem, he never sat down, never slept. Right. And then not 300 years ago, there were many yeshivot where people would not sit down when they learned Torah. So they stayed standing all day. And there were people like the students of Rabbi Joseph Cairo who had to ask if they were allowed to untie the knot of their shoes, because they only did it once a week on Shabbat. And therefore, it might be like a permanent knot that cannot be untied because they never went to sleep. They were just up learning Talmud. So their greatness, and even
these people had a sense that any time they weren't learning was wasted time. Right.
Yeah, right. A volcano went off somewhere on the planet. Whoops, sorry. Exactly. So I think what happened is that you had pre-World War II. You saw this in the Jews in Shanghai. Their scope and knowledge of the Talmud was extraordinary. But the problem with that massiveness is not easily distributable. So now that we've kind of tick-tocked down, if you'll forgive the pun, now we have the ability to have ADHD sensitive Talmudic passages that allow people to feel comfortable and at home, and then everybody grows according to, how much they wish to go further.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the Talmud called the original hyperlinked text.
Oh yes, Wired Magazine quote. I have the quote actually here because I love that quote. Yeah, Wired Magazine.
Okay, and so I know we have many listeners who are quite familiar with the Talmud. They've been either listening to you or listening to me, learning with us in various ways. But there are people here who really don't know what the Talmud is, and I was one of them before I connected as an adult. So I just think it's worth saying that the Talmud, as Gedaliah mentioned, right, so there was the original redaction of these laws that were meant to be an oral tradition, sort of passed down and parallel to and alongside the written Torah. And it was meant to be taught from teacher to student, and it was always oral. A lot of it was memorized. And there were also systems for understanding it and for interpreting scripture and deriving new laws and issuing new decrees in the various centuries. And eventually they wrote down some of it, but it was still coded, shall we say. I mean, it was a real dense formulation of these laws, and it required tremendous background to understand it. But it was also this conversation across the centuries between the sages of the various generations. And for them, I mean, their minds were more powerful, I would say, than the supercomputers that we have now, in the sense that they had all of Scripture, all of the Mishnah, all of the Gemara memorized, and so they could make connections at lightning speed. And the people that you're talking about, who are just studying all the time, how could they have the energy? How could they have the ability to do that? And we don't really know. They just did. It's
right.
Somewhat miraculous. But it's probably, some of the explanation is, okay, they trained themselves to do that from the earliest age and never stopped doing it. Now, we're not functioning at that level, but now we have tools that help us make those links and bring down the pieces of knowledge together so that we can make those connections.
I hate to digress, but did you ever see the movie The Incredibles?
Yeah.
The animation?
Sure, animated. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember the bad boy, the kid who ultimately became the evil because he designed all these power tools? I can't remember what is it. Okay, that was one of the inspirations.
It's a while since I saw that movie, but
me too, and also a big chunk of memories gone. So besides that, but that movie was a big inspiration for people's Talmud because I related to the little brat, and I looked at all these great scholars who've been sitting all their lives in Panovich and Mir Yeshiva, and they were with superpowers naturally, and I come in and I feel the only way I'm ever getting near that, I have to make these little devices so I can sort of. And that's in a way what people's Talmud does do to people. It can accelerate their knowledge. I mean, most people, this, most people don't have a clue what's inside Shas, inside the Talmud. And the more they discover, the more they're flabbergasted, not just impressed. So when people discover that, it's a kind of self-propelling, inverted growth. That's a good thing for everybody.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you in a moment what the People's Talmud is. But I think just following up on what you just said, it's worth noting here that the Talmud touches on every aspect of life, right? It's not just a commentary on the Torah. It's not just a commentary on the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, but it also tells us what is the wise and proper way to go to the bathroom, to create a marriage, to end a marriage, to build a house, to sell a house, to farm a field, to distribute gifts to the poor, to observe a holiday. I mean, and I'm missing vast categories and mountains of information, but it just touches on every aspect of life in its vastness, shall we say. So to access all of this and to help make it accessible to others, you created the People's Talmud. So please tell us, what is the People's Talmud?
Okay, the People's Talmud is a search engine that works on a modified form of AI. meaning it presents two different portals into a database of 8,500 entries that span the Talmud, Bavli, and Yerushalmi. And these entries have been broken down into two primary categories. One is called search, which allows a person to approach 450 drop-down menus that, as you yourself said, goes from everything from animal kingdom down to zodiac. And through search, that's the AI component, because it allows you to thread ideas through the Talmud. In other words, if I'm interested in the subject of why do bad things happen to good people, so if I put that into Google, if I put it to Safari or whatever, okay, I'll get a dump of information, but there's a lot of work that begins there. What this does, it streamlines you. It immediately brings you to every single source in the Talmud dealing with why do bad things happen to good people. It's like skimming a rock on the water, and allows you to fly and have an aerial view of concepts, of which I said there are 450 as well. The other portal, which is called Scroll, is actually where you enter in the Talmud, and that splits into two directions. One, when you click a particular Gemara, it gives you a little blurb what it's all about, but you have a thing called Gemara or brain teasers. If you have the brain teasers, these are about 4,500 single one-liners which are designed to tease you, but they're also a quick, rapid review of the entire Gemara. So many people who are doing Daf Yomi are now using just that in our website. After they finish a Gemara, they come and review, and if they don't know the answer, all you have to do is click it. It immediately brings you back to that Gemara, so you can checklist your learning process. But for the novice, he or she can just click in. It'll show you one of 151 hits or whatever, and just leisurely click, because wherever you leave off, that's where you come back to. You can just click, and within, I don't know, 2 hours, not even all at once, you could go through all of Baba Metzia. You know how many times you go through Baba Metzia before the Daf Yomi does? So that's what, I mean, there's much more, but that's the basic core of what it offers.
Right, and I love that. Is it for every page in the Talmud, or certainly most of them? You've got brilliant little summaries, not of everything that's on the page, but of a key concept, and the kind of key concept that opens up other concepts on the page. I've certainly been looking at it. It's helping me teach Daf Yomi every day.
Wonderful.
And it's,
well, can
awesome.
I respond to that? This is very. I'm very happy you brought this up, because it highlights what people's Talmud is and what it isn't. People's Talmud is not learning Talmud. People's Talmud is giving you golden nuggets of Talmudic wisdom as a primer to the Talmud. So now you can become familiar with all these ideas, and hopefully you'll find a good teacher. You know, somebody once asked me, what's the dream of people's Talmud? I said, well, we shut it down because everybody has to learn Gemara. But until then, the process here is very much showing you the depth, the brilliance, and the availability of this information. That's exactly why, like you said, sometimes it won't be the whole daf. That's not our point. It's just this pluck fruit that'll whet your appetite. In fact, you can click on our Show Me button. It brings you into Safaria. So then you can have the actual Gemara itself if you want. But that's why, therefore, it's not every, and that's why it's also not every page, because as you know, sometimes a sugya or an idea can go 3 or 4 pages. So people's Talmud is only going to catch it and then leave the rest of the pages.
Okay. Right. It's worth just noting here for people who are curious, how when we talk about this multiplicity of tools, and also the sort of cooperative nature of Talmud study, you know, we're not competing with each other, right? Accidental Talmudists and People's Talmud and Safaria are all complementary tools. Safaria has all of Scripture online and in an app. You know, we teach everything. We've got Accidental Talmudist app is coming out like in the next week or two. We're very excited about that. But these are all tools that can help you access this mountain, fountain. It really is a fountain mountain. I actually once wrote a movie about a guy turning a mountain into a fountain. Never got made, but one day maybe. And that was before I was ever connected to Judaism or Talmud cool. study.
By the way, I have to tell you, I love Accidental Talmudists. I love your name, and your logo is brilliant. I already see the logo as like a little shtickle algorithm of Kabbalah. And, you know, our world is so dark. It's so desperately dark that any and everyone who can turn on a light, doesn't matter what the wattage is, it's all helpful. So I agree with you completely. It's all hands on deck.
All hands on deck, exactly. And one thing that you make me think of is, what is a Tana? A Tana is a rabbi of the period when the Mishnah was being compiled, right? The rabbis of the Mishnah, the rabbis that are quoted in the Mishnah when it was finally compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, known as Rebbe. Then the next several generations of sages who were making that initial commentary in the Mishnah, which is what is you're referring to when you say the Gemara, sometimes called the Talmud, and the Gemara plus the Mishnah is the Talmud. But those rabbis are called Amoraim, plural, or Amora, single. And what I find so interesting about the word Amora is that when the sages of that period were talking about an Amora, what they were actually talking about was, your massive scholar, famous scholar comes to town. Often he's, pretty old. He doesn't have such a loud voice. And what he's got is the younger rabbis who, after they didn't have, PA systems. So he would say what he says, and then the Amora would repeat it loud, and sometimes translating or clarifying or adding just a little bit of a gloss. So that was particular for the crowd that was assembled there, so they could hear it and understand. So Gedaliah Gurfein, you are an Amora of amplifying
Sometimes
these
I feel I
voices
spell
out
it
to
with,
the world today.
oh, thank you. Sometimes I feel like I spell that word with an N at the end.
A moron.
But I'm happy being one without the N. That's okay.
So we've been talking so much about wisdom. I'm sure somebody's out there thinking, well, give me some wisdom. You're talking about wisdom. Give me some wisdom. So what are some of the pearls that you like to share when somebody is new to this whole field, or, knows it well and would love to be reminded of this pearl today?
Wow. It's funny. At the start of the show, you started talking about the mind running and the sparks, and asking me that question was like looking at fireworks, like which spark do I grab? It's not an easy call. And I have no idea. Oh my gosh, it's getting flooded in here.
I'll
Okay.
talk for a
Okay.
moment while you're thinking. I'll give you a
Yeah.
chance. But I saw this guy, some kind of TED speaker, but it was a brilliant little thing that he said. If you, he did a demonstration where he had some kids, and he threw up a bunch of magic markers in the air, and he said, "Catch magic markers." And the kids would try to catch as many as they could, and they all fell on the floor. But if he said, "Catch the blue magic marker," and then he threw a bunch in the air, the kid would pluck the blue one out of the air. So when we try to grab too much, we end up with nothing. But when we go for one thing that speaks to
yes,
us.
you bingo. I was holding by nothing. Okay, I have something very interesting. It's all interesting, but I think it's something that somebody who really is not familiar with the Talmud might enjoy this. And that is, there is a law, which, by the way, side point, one of the beautiful things of Talmud and Judaism is a morphing of right brain, left brain, of judgment and kindness and art and letters and science and creativity. It really morphs together. So in Judaism, the law and the philosophy can actually embed in one another. And this is a story of that. Because the law is that when a scribe is writing a Torah, he may not use an ink which is indelible, because he might make a mistake and then he won't be able to erase it properly without causing damage. Now, there was a great scribe known as Rabbi Meir, who was a Tana, as you know, Rabbi Meir Balanes. And when he was a young man, he went to study how to write as a scribe by the teachings of Rabbi Ishmael. And his teacher came over one day and noticed that he's actually using an indelible dye. And the rabbi said to him, "But why would you do that when you know you can't do that? That's not allowed." And so Rabbi Meir answered, "Well, I never make a mistake. So therefore, I don't have a problem of using indelible." So then Rabbi Shmuel asked the obvious question, well, if you never make a mistake, then why not at least use the other one and everyone will be happy? Why do you still use this one? And he answers, I have a fear. And my fear is I might be in the middle of writing God's name, and I'll write the Hebrew letter Dalet, and all of a sudden something will distract me, and I'll look away, and in that moment, a fly will come down and will pick up the tip of the Dalet with its little paws while they're still wet, and he will have turned the Hebrew letter Dalet into the Hebrew letter Resh. That's the Gemara. But then when you open it up, it's a garden of just gems and thoughts. What's going on here? Rabbi Meir is teaching us that no matter who you are, Jew or Gentile, it makes no difference, same God, same family, we all come from Adam and Eve. Each one of us, when we open up our eyes in the morning, we open up our new day, we have a blank section of the Torah, of our creation in this world of our life. And we have to be very diligent, make sure we don't waste time. Everything we do has real meaning. And so therefore, each time we open our eyes, we open the day, we open up our Torah, which is a blank page. What we think, what we speak, what we do, that will be in there forever. And therefore, we have to focus, not to waste time, not to squander the gifts of life that we have, and to live life to the fullest like we can. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we can get distracted. And the moment we lose sight of what we're doing, that's when we become vulnerable for downfall. And that's why it was specifically the letter Dalet, which means, or is associated with the word one, like Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, versus the letter Resh, which is associated with Elohim Acharim, other gods. And so therefore, if we look away and we lose our focus, there's the possibility of something which was used to show our way to God to take us off the route. And so that's like an example of a Gemara, if you will. We have a very clear halakhic discussion as to the nature of the ink. You have a specific story that highlighted a situation that was resolved. That's like future rabbis will do as well. And then you have an esoteric level of it, which has a great personal takeaway.
Beautiful. Now, just a second. They do write with indelible ink now, right? Are you saying that it changed because of Rabbi?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe. Listen, I want to tell you something. When I first moved into this area in Jerusalem, we have, as you know, a place here called the Shtibla, like a prayer factory. And I went over to the head rabbi and I said to him, whoa, I was only here like a couple of weeks. I said, Rabbi, I just saw this man do so-and-so and so-and-so. And the rabbi says to me, the first thing you have to know about this place is you never learn law from what you see in the Shtibla. So for me, when it comes to halacha, you should always double check me. I'm happy to be wrong as long as it was corrected.
Right. We don't paskin halacha from the Gemara. No. That's very important because so often we encounter, meaning that when we encounter the sages discussing laws in the Talmud, and they seem to come to a resolution on a particular page of what the law is, that doesn't mean that that's how the law ended up. Right? And so if you want to check what is Jewish law, you go to a place like Shulchan Aruch, right. And then, adding to the toolbox, as it were, for learning Jewish wisdom. That's why I like the Koren Talmud, Rav Steinsaltz's elucidation of it, because when these discussions come up, there will be a note there that said, and the law is, and that's a very useful tool right there. Right. Rabbi Meir is such an inspiration in so many ways. And there's beautiful stories about him, tragic story within the family about his sons and his wife informing him what happened, political stories, how he, was outcast for a while and welcomed back, but his name was taken off certain laws that are in the Talmud. He's the one who stood by Elisha ben Abuya, right? When he was rightfully so outcast from the community of sages because he went bad, as it were, which I think is kind of on our minds at the time that we're recording this podcast. There was a disgraceful speech given just a few days ago at the Oscars ceremony. I don't know if you heard about that in Israel. You're so busy doing what you do.
No, we heard.
Yeah, it was, well, enough said.
Sad.
It's sad, but these kinds of stories and disgraceful stories and triumphant stories we also find in the Talmud, right? It's not like there's anything new. The Jewish community produces, heroes and not such heroes.
Can I interrupt you
is
for
there a
one second?
character? Please.
Just before you get off that point, I want to tell you, there is a Gemara about a city called Gamla in the north, where the Chachamim prohibited the other villages to going to visit them on Shabbat because this community got so ripped drunk every Shabbos, it was a danger to go there if you were not from the hometown. So you talk about things, you know. So, this is
I forgot that
anyhow.
one.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to ask you, who are some, or what is one character in the Talmud that really stands out to you?
Oh, I'm so
Uh,
happy you did that. I do that. I told this to young yeshiva kids all the day. I said, and they have Rebbe cards. They should have Tanaim Amaroyim cards, you know, with little
right.
quotes on the back, and or maybe you could even give them different magical power level ratings and stuff, so the kids could tie into it. So if I had to, I definitely have my three Shas heroes, and Rebbe Meir maybe number one, Rebbe Yeshua ben Levi, and Reish Lakish. Those are my
Beautiful. Let's talk about them. That's wonderful. Let's start with
sure.
Reish Lakish. I mean, he's the most colorful one of all in
Well,
many
he's also
ways.
the Baal Tshuva of Shas. That's why we relate to him.
Yes. Yeah. Tell us about him.
Well, okay. I mean, Reish Lakish, it's a little bit of a discussion what the actual title means. Reish Lakish, was it actually a name, or was it mean he was Rosh, the head of a group of bandits, or what could those people have been, whatever. But there are incredible stories of him before he became religious, where he sold himself to a group of cannibals to be their dinner, and how he tricked them all and wound up getting out of the pot and get his money plus other, and got out safely. I mean, he was wild. And then, of course, there's the famous story, which I know Daf Yomi's either gotten to or coming up shortly to, but that's a story of where he's like Tarzan in the forest, and he looks down, he sees what he thinks a beautiful naked woman in the river, and or maybe by him, oi, 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 and he goes jumping down into the river, spins around this gorgeous woman, and she has he with an enormous beard. It's Rabbi Yochanan, and Reish Lakish like jumps back and says, "Oh, beauty like you is wasted on a man." And Rabbi Yochanan says, "Yeah, well, strength like yours is wasted on a criminal." So Rabbi Yochanan says, "I'll make you a deal. I'll give you my daughter, and she can marry you if you give your strength to the
Sister,
Torah."
right? Sister?
Sister, yes, his
Sister?
daughter, sister, his sister. Yeah, thank you.
Right.
I'll give you my sister. Sister always has the Mexican connotation. That's why I guess I blotted it out. So, I give you my sister. So if you give your strength to Torah, and he agreed. And that's the amazing thing about the Gemara. The mountain he jumped out, he could barely climb back up. And the sages asked, "What? This guy's like Superman. Why couldn't he go back up?" Because once he spiritually made the vow, the strength was gone. So he had a hard time getting back up to collect his stuff. But nonetheless, he became Reish Lakish's, his partner through life, and the horrible, tragic ending there, of course, but they were partners all the way. And even when he passed away and they brought the substitute in, Rabbi Yochanan said, "Oi," because he remembers Reish Lakish would always challenge him, where the newcomer would only say, "Oh, yeah, that's a very good, thank you, Rabbi, great idea." So it was that competition that made Reish Lakish. I don't think you go 20 pages in Shas without seeing his name.
I think that story, the part of it that you mentioned, that, he jumped in, he incredibly vigorous, criminal, lusty guy. And now he's made that commitment right there. I mean, because I think, why would you make such a commitment on the spot based on the idea that he's going to marry this handsome man's beautiful sister? That's quite a big commitment, right, for the unseen. But I think probably he was at a place in his life where he'd realized that there was no real satisfaction to be gained from living this crime-driven, lusty life, and he was ready for a change.
Right.
Then he commits to make the change, and does he immediately, hear a band of angels singing and welcoming him, and life is rosy and it's filled with meaning, and he's going to work hard, but it's kind of ease of spirit? No. And I think that's such an important lesson, that very often when we make these commitments to live on a higher plane, to make reform, to, commit to a course of study, to be more religious, to be more righteous, then all of a sudden tremendous difficulties come into our path, and then we question the commitment. Hey, things were easier before. What's going on? But I think there are teachings about this very point,
Oh yeah, for
And
sure.
those manias, those hardships, are actually a gift that tells us we're going in the right direction.
Right, right. Well, I don't want to put in too many people's Talmud's plugs, but I will say that if you go to the search page, for example, you go down to a category called philosophy. In the drop-down menu, one of the subjects is called meaning and suffering. And that's a very good source to research. Someone who really wants this particular issue, really wants to have a deeper understanding. It'll give you the base of all these sources to be able to integrate into thinking. But yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the most difficult things I feel that's going on in the Jewish world today. There's a Jewish world, and I'm talking about deep Torah, like deep this and deep that. This is deep Torah I'm talking about. That there are a lot of people who are really believers of good and bad, that they're good and they're bad. They're good people and they're bad people, and that's a good thing and that's a bad thing, and so on. And it doesn't sit with me. It really doesn't. And I just, maybe all my learning doesn't point to that at all. Because if you really understood the Ari correctly, or if one were to understand the Ari correctly, it would be simply saying that it's a tree of good and bad. The good and the bad are always together, and they're always one and parcel in the other. It's not, the tree is not the tree of good or bad. It's the tree of good and bad. So therefore, when it's all mixed up, the good and the bad, and it's like that, then you have to be aware of the evil in your mitzvahs. And you also have to discover, in fact, the mitzvahs that you did, even your worst of errors. And only by opening up those both sides do you come to a really, my own not at all humble opinion, do you come to a really point of balance and center in your love of God, your love of your fellow man, your love of all creation. Because you've now moved from a tree of good and bad to a tree of life. And life is all inclusive. And therefore, ultimately, one can see that there was never bad. It was just part of a phase of the growing of the world that we live in. We do not live in a finished product. We live in a project, at work.
You just sparked so many thoughts for me. But let me start by challenging you.
Yeah, there you go.
Let me start by challenging you, because I know my community, accidental Talmudist community. There's somebody already typing this comment. What do you mean there's no bad? There are horrible, awful, evil people who murder and rape and pillage and get away with it. Why does this happen? Why does God allow that?
I'm glad you asked that question, because that's not at all what I meant to infer. So if it came up as a question, it gives me a chance to address it. Of course, there's evil. In fact, I'll tell you, not you, maybe your listener who I'm talking through, something extraordinary. There's a verse in the book of Isaiah, Yeshayahu, which is intentionally distorted by our sages and embedded in our daily prayers. And that is that right in a key transition point in the morning prayer, suddenly we come to a blessing that says that God is the forms the light, and he creates the darkness, and he makes peace, and he creates everything. But yet the actual verse in the Bible says he created evil. So that all evil in the world, as crazy as it sounds, comes from God. However, it's not crazy, it's imperative. Because to suggest that something can have a life force of any nature and not be from God would suggest there's two powers at play. So therefore, since there's only one God, everything. Now we have to understand, forgive me, I never went to Harvard, but to put into context is what's going to allow us to be able to see how it plays out. And not only that, we have to be who we are. We're not angels, we're people. We are sentenced to this world. We have a job to do, and that job manifests itself in picking up guns and fighting wars and doing all sorts of things that angels are not expected to do. But we are assigned to be human. So therefore, we have to have bifocal vision. We have to very much focus on what's evil. The Talmud says if someone is out to get you, kill them in the morning before they wake up. So that we don't mess around when it comes to people like that. It's no game. There's no room for that, no margin whatsoever. Simultaneously, we have to also have a spiritual higher vision. What did we do that God is trying to fix in us? Why is this happening? Or is this the greatest darkness of all time right before the most phenomenal light of all time? Who knows? So as Jews, we have to be suspect for all options and keep our ideas open. But the creation of evil is very real. Why was it created? Simple. Because God doesn't need anything from us. even if we put on Rabbeinu Tam, which is great, and I do, and I hope you do, and I hope the whole world does, but okay, God goes, whoopee-doo? Well, actually, God does do whoopee-doo. Why? Well, just have a child, and you'll understand. Because we're God's children. We are B'nai Israel, and we are all children of God. And every time a child learns how to walk a little better, the father's hysterical with joy. So therefore, everything in this world is given as a gift for us to become better than we are, to wake up every morning as a new and better person. And therefore, this gift of life is not for God, it's for us, and therefore through us creates the relationship with God. So I think that's kind of like, therefore, evil become the obstacles, and sometimes it is hell. That's why it's called hell. I mean, just if I may, on the side, from a Jewish perspective, we don't believe heaven, earth, and hell, and like hell's like earth is like the DM zone between the bad guys and the good guys fighting for, and that's, I mean, like I said, but that's not Jewish. The Jewish thing is heaven, hell, earth. Why? Because if you measure the world by physical pleasure, well, obviously heaven's the best and hell's the worst, and earth you might get a little lucky. But if you measure the world according to your service of God or revelation of truth and honesty, then there's nothing like heaven. But even hell's okay. Because in hell, you know exactly what's going on. It's all judged. It's all just. But down here, you might not even believe in God. That's dangerous. So, that's why the evil was created. Because if down here, you still score, you become a good human being, that's incredible. It's higher than angels. What an opportunity.
For those who are listening to the podcast, Gedaliah, with his hand gestures, was showing that that in this Jewish conception, heaven is still at the top, but then hell is somewhere between earth and heaven. And what I hear you saying is, and the reason for that is because truth is revealed.
Yes.
Even in hell, truth is revealed. We know what's evil, what's not, why people are there. I think it's also worth mentioning that in the Jewish conception of the afterlife, it's not binary, not even remotely. There's, infinite number of levels of where you can end up. And there's a perfect accounting, as it were, of where people should be and how, what they can do for themselves to set themselves up in that world. And even how you can rise higher once you're there. In part, thanks to the legacy that you leave here, the people that are still learning, what you taught, doing the deeds that perhaps you set up. But also, I'd like to believe that, if this world has been called many times a kind of birth canal to the next world, or an anteroom, the green room, before you go on stage in the world of souls. Well, then the world of souls is not going to be some place where, you get your harp, you get a beer, and, you just jam and watch the Super Bowl all day long forever.
Oh,
who knows what the work of the next world is? I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of it, and we're just trying to get on the court, as it were, when we get there. And there's just so much to learn and so much to do here. And everything comes from God because we're in God, right? So evil has to serve a purpose in this world. Now, I think another answer to the person who's objecting, there's evil. Of course there's evil, and we have to fight it. But Absolutely. It's rare in the 8 billion people, or I don't know what the number is now. Do you know? 9 billion, 10 billion people in the world? Something like that. A lot of people. It's rare to encounter pure evil. The vast majority of us are the biggest fights that we're going to encounter against evil are in ourselves. We have so much work to do, and we know that we've done wrong. We know that we may be doing wrong today, might do wrong tomorrow, sometimes despite our best intentions and best efforts. But if we can't name the wrongs that we do, how are we going to, get to the work of righting them and writing them RIGHT? And right. So I think making a study of our deeds, a study of our own psychology, is such important work. And I think the sages were so mindful of that. Just yesterday in the Daf, they were talking about Well, everything is meant to increase shalom bayis, right? To increase the peace between a husband and wife, and to reduce enmity between them. And so, for example, since the husband in a traditional patriarchal society, as they were writing the world that they were living in, so the husband was the head of the household, and he was responsible to sustain his wife and his children and any other members of the household. And in return, if they found lost objects, legally speaking, they would belong to him, so that he wouldn't resent the members of his household having privileges, beyond the scope of the house. However, if he's initiated a divorce proceeding against her and not completed it, then at that stage, anything she finds is her own. And that will increase enmity between them. And good, because if he started a divorce proceeding, he better finish it and not leave her stranded so she can't go and find a better husband. And that kind of fine-tuning of psychology and law, I think, is one of the wonderful aspects in the Talmud that I love.
Are you on Nun Tet? I don't track off your
No. We're in Bava Metzia today, I think, is Yud Gimel.
Okay. Because the famous Gemara that you're quoting also is on Nun Tet. And there you have, I'm sure you remember, if you're tall and your
59.
Wife is short,
Yes.
I'm sorry, 59p, yes. If you're tall and if you're shy, bend down to listen to what she has to say and so on. And the way I remembered the daf, it's not because I have a smart brain, but it's just because 59 in Hebrew is pronounced not, what not to do in the home.
Oh, beautiful. So wait, express that again, because that's one of those pearls that people can take away. Be a little bit more expansive. What does it mean to bend down to listen to your wife?
Well, I think we have to go one step prior to that. And that is, we know that in Jewish tradition, those of us that are Shomer Shabbat, usually classically every Friday night, sing the last chapter of a book written by King Solomon, actually for his mother. But we reincorporate that and we sing it for our wives. And that's a woman of valor. And this is the idea that in Judaism, I know my wife has a cousin in London. They had a big magnet on the refrigerator that says, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And that's
wife's happy life.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is why the man breaks the glass under the chuppah. It's the last time he'll ever put his foot down. So as he understands that his wife is his passageway to heaven, all blessing comes down through the wife. All financial success comes down from the wife. Right? There's the famous expression, behind every great man is a shocked mother-in-law. Right? So yeah. Every wife is it should be treated like gold, like a queen for that matter. Now, that's nice to say, but hello, welcome to Earth, first time here. It's not like that. It's difficult because men and women are different animals. And these are like, giraffe and cougars trying to live together. It's not so simple. So it requires a blessing from above, which is easily accessible if we open the door to receive that by making our home a place of peace. That's why it's called shalom bayit, the peace of the home. Because the word peace, as you know, in Hebrew also is connected to the word to be whole, shalem, or even to pay, because you pay off all your debts, you feel whole again. So shalom is a sense of wholeness. And God made man and woman as one person. He called them Adam. So therefore, in the divine light, if you will, there's no such thing as a human without like a three-legged race, these two partners together. So therefore, the half shekel realizes that you're not a full shekel without the other half shekel. Well, that's that unit. And therefore, everything should be where the man is subservient in his kindness to his wife. I'll give you an example. I know this will sound stupid, but that's okay. In my home, I love to wash the dishes on Shabbos, and I love to set the tables. And the way I do it is I think to myself, well, we know that today the Jerusalem temple are our homes. And our table that we eat at is the table that was in the holy temple, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my wife's candles are the menorah. So my house is the temple. Well, then that affords me a chance I'll never have, because I'm not a Kohen, so I'll never be able to be the high priest and I'll never be able to do the service in the temple, but I can do the service in my temple. So setting up every fork, every knife, and making this is that, so that the table looks royal, or washing the dishes because, she's the queen. And therefore, I have to honor the queen. It's even called queen is Shabbos. We don't call it the king. Shabbat's queen. So therefore, it's the wife. So it's her day off. So, but I think that those kind of little mind shifts and all make you realize what the value of a home is. And that's what the Talmud there comes to give us. And it also tells us things not to do. And that's why I always said it's because there's like 59, which means not to remind not. But for sure, if one thing is your wife is small, bend over and listen to her, because what she has to say can very well be divinely inspired.
Yeah. You said earlier this idea that, I forget how you put it, but there's this idea that every moment only comes along once. You have a chance to execute in that moment. Oh, well, you were talking about Rabbi Meir writing. And so you only have a chance to write that letter one time, to live this second one time, to have this conversation one time, and to interact with your spouse, at 5:59 on, Tuesday, March 12th. You're only going to get that one time. And how are you going to handle it? Are you going to deliver, or are you going to be lazy and slack off? And if God forbid you make her cry,
bye-bye.
There's repercussions to that, not only in this world, but in the next. I mean, when you give her joy, there's echoes throughout the spheres. And when you give her
but there's
sadness,
always
there's
tshuva
echoes throughout the spheres. But there's always tshuva. There's always a chance to
yes.
make an atonement. And that's what's so beautiful. You talked about earlier about good and evil. And, and you mentioned the Veiras, right? So sins, transgressions, the things we've done wrong in the past. But if you recognize that you've done that, and you do the work, and you get organized, and you understand why you did that, and how you came to do that, and what guardrails you need in your life so that you won't do it again, and you pray for help that you won't do it again, and then the moment comes and you don't do it again, then not only have you performed holy work, but the transgressions that you did in the past are now transferred in the holy ledger to the positive side. They become merits to you, because somebody who was wallowing in such lowly behavior elevated himself. Then your previous lowly behavior actually becomes a gift, a value, a treasure that you take with you, but only if you make that atonement and that refinement. It's an extraordinary system. And there's so much
I think of it like satellites. The way I teach that idea is satellites, because through the position of a satellite, you can be calling from one side of the planet, which the other part you're calling is too far around the curve, so to speak. But the satellite allows you to join those two unconnectable points. So tshuva was created before creation. Therefore, it's embedded, all of creation is embedded inside tshuva as well. I mean, you said God, which is a course, but also the facility of tshuva. So therefore, when a person patches in to tshuva, they can actually re-access a point in time which otherwise they have no way to reach. And through that portal, like you said, comes that fixing.
Okay, that is beautiful. That is beyond beautiful. Let's just unpack that for a second. First of all, you said that teshuvah, atonement, was created before creation.
Yes, isn't that a great line?
Before there was humanity,
God
before created atonement. Right? Before there was an earth, before there was a Big Bang, before any of that, there was atonement. Now that's extraordinary. What? Not logically speaking. Okay, so there's a creator and he wants there to be stars and planets and air and bugs and worms and gorillas and people. Presumably the height of creation, though some would disagree. And then they're going to organize themselves into families and towns and communities and societies, and because they're human, they're going to screw up and hurt each other, and they have this innate faculty of regret, very powerful force if handled properly. And they're going to want to make it right. They want to make up for it. and then they're going to, learn about how you make things right and get better at it and become better people. So you would think that the people come first and then this concept of atonement. But no, says the Talmud, Teshuvah was created before the Olam. How is that possible? What does that mean? Does that mean that God knew what he was setting up?
Well, for sure, God knows everything all the time, right? But I don't think that's the issue, although that's the backbone of everything, of course. But I think in specifically concerning tshuva, I think you have to do two things. One, you have to play a closer analysis of the word tshuva itself, just to hold that for a second. And then to understand, what is, if you think of tshuva as a software engine, how does it fit into creation and what does it operate? So the word tshuva, as you know, means literally to return. Like that's why you have rabbis' books are called tshuvas, because they're responses to questions. So that means that at the very moment of creation, what was pre-creation? Pre-creation was only the oneness of God. And therefore, in the space of oneness of God, there's no movement. That's why God's called the place, because God's everywhere all the time. Only when there was a place created for movement, as soon as you had that, you would also have to have embedded in that software someday in the way future, it would close again. And as it opens and as it closes, like these certain angels that run and return, so this is the creation of the heartbeat of all creation. And so therefore, this actually is what tshuva is. It's an innate operating software engine in the primary moment of creation that had to exist at the moment there would be a thing called time and space, because this time and space would never be anything but constantly moving and thus returning. And so tshuva would be in all systems the enabler to bring everything back to the place where it belongs.
The holy reset.
Yeah, exactly. When it's your fault, it's default.
Yeah, it's spectacular. It's spectacular. And we have this beautiful story, right? Sanhedrin, I think 38, where God is thinking about making the people, right? And so he, in his incredible modesty and humility, because he's got a community around him of angels, the difference between us and angels is that they're always in the presence of God. So that it wouldn't really, it's not conceivable to not do what God wants. They're just constantly living in the will of God. But God is considering making these creatures, these humans, who could choose to be ignorant of God, who could choose to ignore God, who could do whatever they want to do in their physical realm. He says, I'm thinking about making these creatures. Shall I do it? And the angels say, well, what will be the deeds of man? And God lays out for them what the deeds of humans will be. And the angels say, yeah, no, bad idea. Don't make those. And God, extends God's pinky metaphorically and wipes out all the angels. They're dissatisfactory. And he makes a new myriad of angels and runs it by them. Shall I create man? What will be the deeds of man? And he shows them and they say, no, bad idea. And he wipes out all the angels. And then a third myriad of angels are created, and God presents this plan to them, and these angels have some sense of history.
Exactly.
And they say, well, whatever God will do is good.
Exactly. And one of those angels was, yeah. No, sorry, yeah.
So God creates,
great.
Right, so God creates the humans. And the humans go and do what the humans do. And then comes the generation of the flood, which is so thoroughly wicked that God is now going to wipe out the humans. And at that point, this is such a comedic, this is a Larry David skit, right? So the angels kind of unified, like one voice, right? Look at God and they're like, and I'm making an expression for the listeners of like, expressions like, a face which says, well, what'd you expect?
No surprise here.
You knew what they would do. And God says, yes, And what can I do? I love them, and he didn't want to be surrounded by yes men.
Yes, angels.
Yes, angels. And he loves us. He wants, us in all our folly and brokenness and incompleteness and foolishness, because from that place we can make progress and we can do that holy work, and what a triumph it is.
I'm sure you've heard before the Kotzker Rebbe said, there's nothing more whole than a broken heart.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
May I share one little thought on what you just said? Would you mind?
Please. That's what we do.
Okay. Okay. The obvious question would be, obviously, God who knows everything, why did he go through the 3 phases of the angels when he could have just made from the get-go the right set? So the answer here lies a very interesting concept of, again, coming back to this creation of time and space and therefore motion. That what God's goal, as we said before, is to create a utopia for man meaning male, female, that we are able on our own accord, not like robots, but through our free will and faculty of wisdom, able to get the game and understand what it is and score and win. That's the whole idea. So to make the perfect level playing field, it had to be perfectly balanced between not too physical and not overly spiritual. Because if it wasn't 50-50 exactly, there goes the free will. So therefore, the process in moving in time and space, it's called a waterfall. So there were the earlier vessels, which were very pure because they're the first degrade from the beginning, let's say, of the levels of creation of the Sphirot. And those levels popped, if you will, because they just couldn't handle anything other than pure truth until they became refined enough to now the angels that he had here were refined from rather than created from nothing. In other words, they were already part and parcel of this process of God's wanting to have creation. And that comes down into the earth. God didn't know that there would be the flood. God didn't know the temples would be destroyed, of course. But this is the continuation of the endless breaking of the vessels in order to give us the pieces that we're able to really hold and then to do the repairs.
Yeah, I'm reminded, I think, how did a master sword maker, right, of the samurai swords, because they fold the steel and hammer it over and over again. He has like a perfect sword, a perfect edge, hammer it again, ruin it, fold it, hammer it out again, make it beautiful, ruin it, fold it. And only then, after so many repetitions, does he come to that final beautiful sword that probably even he feels he's abandoned, right? Like any artwork, it's not finished. He has to abandon it at a certain point. Except God never abandons us. And this process, right, of creating, rotting, wrecking, creating anew, and at a higher level, it's so endless. That's what's so beautiful about it. And it's so interesting what you're saying, this combination of the physical and the spiritual, right? On the one hand, the whole purpose, you could say, of this physical world that we live in is that it's a place where thinking beings can exist without awareness of God. In other words, it's a place where it's possible for atheists to exist. It's a place where everyone's not completely overwhelmed by the presence of God. And you could say, oh, yeah, no, it's all just physics and, for some reason that scientists get that I don't, there was nothing. And then there was like, a universe full of stuff. But it just happened. And then everything else is falling action from that. And it's explicable to some. And then we don't have to worry about God. So we could go on that way. But then what does God do? God inserts God's self into history and gives us a Torah. And it's done in such a way that you can choose. I will read about it. I will learn about it. I will grow in wisdom according to this holy tradition, or I will turn my back on it, right? We have that choice. And then I think the humility and modesty of God, it's so infinite. It's such a lesson for us to learn from, that this being that is incomprehensible to us, utterly incomprehensible to us, we have much more in common with an amoeba than we have with the Holy One, blessed be He, because we and the amoeba are both mortal. are both finite, are both physical. But God
That's a great
says
T-shirt, by the way.
What's
That's a great T-shirt. Me and my amoeba.
Me and my amoeba, right? But then God tells us in that Torah that if you will perform these deeds, in this case, he's talking about burning the incense or burning a sacrifice, but metaphorically that extends basically to doing his will. He says it has a pleasant aroma. And we know that that means just doing his will, because our commentator Rashi says so. That why does it say it's a pleasing aroma? Because God commanded it and we did it, right? And any parent will understand the joy that you get, when you teach your kid to, clean up after making a spill, because that's the right thing to do. And then the first time they do it without being asked, it's like, nice, very nice.
Yes, the novelty of the moment.
And that you only get once.
Exactly. Halavai, they did that all the time. By the way,
it's been such a... Go ahead, please.
No, please.
No, go ahead.
I
will never stop a spark.
Okay, Sparky. So I was just going to share something I thought you might enjoy, because obviously it's ludicrous to say that God smells anything, right? So therefore, what is it? Of all the analogies, why is it choosing that analogy? And it's interesting because if you look at the human face, so the world was created in 7 days, and we have 7 apertures. Unless you're from New York City like me, I have a few others up here. But anyhow, we have 7. Those are like basketball scars downtown on the Lower East Side. But when you have 7 holes corresponding to the 7 days of creation, you have 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, and 1 mouth. These are the 7 lights of the menorah. And their primary functions are input, right? Therefore, you always have to hear both sides of the story. It's never the left is right and the right is wrong, or vice versa. Both are right and both can be wrong. But you have to hear both sides. You have to see and you have to smell. Then the 7th point is outputs, where the speakers, the humans that speak. So, and that's directly in the middle, because it's supposed to be a balance of the scales of the wisdom. But the other major difference is the nose, because while the eyes and the ears process their information once it gets to the brain, although there's some of that in the nose, really the nostrils are already combining the information before it gets to the brain. So, and also the nose is the part that comes lowest into the physical world, if you will. And that's why the nose and smell is associated with Mashiach. Reach Lichoach is also with Mashiach, and Messiah. And therefore, this idea of why by God it's like an aroma smelling is because it means that the world he created was used properly and perfectly. And therefore, the proof of it is the coming up of the nostrils directly in the middle, straight to the brain, like balance. That's one idea behind that. I thought you might get a kick out of.
Oh, that's beautiful. Isn't the word remez also, it means a scent, right? And so
not
often
sure. I mean, normally it means a hint.
A hint.
You mean like remez, like in pardes, like in the word pardes, that remez? I mean, I look again. Add to the list. Never learn halakha from me. Never learn Hebrew from me. So I don't know.
I'm sure it means hint, and I heard it as scent.
Well, but, okay. The hound dogs have to be on the scent. That's like a little hint they got, right? So
yes. Well, and also this one is right, that the sense of scent, of smell, is the only one that was not involved in the original.
For that reason.
Right. And so there's something pure about it, and so often, and just like a smell can trigger a memory and bring you back to a whole world.
Amazing.
There is some kind of hard wiring, and there's a purity to that, and there's no falseness. You can't lie with a smell. A smell either is or is not. You might lose your sense of smell.
Well, I was going to say, as kids, we had a line for that. Remember that line as a kid? He who smelt it dealt it.
I do remember that.
I remember that from 3rd grade.
I wonder if kids still say that. I'm sure they do. There's nothing new under the sun. Gedaliah, it's been a joy.
Super joy.
To talk Talmud with you. People who are curious about the People's Talmud, what is the URL?
It's just thepeoplestalmud.com.
Thepeoplestalmud.com. Repeat,
right.
Thepeoplestalmud.com. It's an incredible resource. And we really share a mission. I always talk about that at Accidental Talmudists. What we try to do is to make it accessible to everybody without dumbing it down. The tradition is so sophisticated. There's so much to it. And of course, parts aren't accessible right away. But you can jump in immediately and start to sniff out to get the scent, of all this holiness, of this wisdom, of this folklore, stories, parables, laws, instruction for living, things, the do's and the don'ts. It's just a wonderful, wonderful resource. And I really recommend to everybody to check out thepeoplestalmud.com. And not only, and if you're a Jewish educator, a Jewish thinker, a Jewish writer, there's a place for you to contribute to the People's Talmud.
That's right. Like you do.
I know that you're always interested. And I know you're always interested in that. Any final thoughts? Looking to the future, your hopes and aspirations?
Well, I assume you mean in terms of the People's Talmud. Otherwise, the other list is kind of like
and beyond.
Exactly. Always reminds me of a little kid with Bullwinkle when he just had this little itsy bitsy note and just unfolds and unfolds and unfolds. And so, People's Talmud right now, there are some things, God willing, in the hopper. Most important, personally, I believe, is to get People's Talmud fully and functioning in Hebrew. I think the land of Israel and the people who are here right now have had a major wound. And the thing about a major wound is wounds can go very deep, and that's a double-edged sword. If it's healed properly, it can be a huge growing experience that's beyond anything we've ever had in the life of this modern country. I mean, just day and night difference could happen here. But that requires our participation. Obviously requires God's doing, but we have to be our players. So having that in Hebrew right now, I think there are a lot of Israelis who are really looking to find and reconnect with their Judaism, not to become ultra-Orthodox or whatever, which, by the way, is nobody's business. Everybody answers to God who they truly feel or whatever, but at least to be knowledgeable. So that's really high on our list. And then we have little features. We have like we're running right now with the Jewish Press, a blog, which is called the Daf Yomi Brain Teaser, where it sort of like asks a little question just to get people to click into the site in order for them really to be able to see that there's much more going on than whatever they're going through. But we have lots of those programs, and a lot of yeshivas are starting to use the site. So we want to have like online computer games, and give them teams and let them sort of see which one can accrue the most amount by asking questions along the way. It's a lot of stuff. Wait a minute. I will tell you something incredible. People's Talmud has spilt off the computer into the real world. And now we are for years, the last 3-4 years, deeply involved in some of the most distant, if even, Jewish communities, which has resulted in things I could have never even imagined, where I'm now called, not by my choosing, but I'm called by 2 Igbo communities in Inigua, Nigeria, their rabbi. And I've built water systems so they can have drinking water through the year. And we've been involved in bringing in facilities to build a Beit Midrash and a synagogue and a children's school. And I mean, all kinds of different things. And now it's carried over into Uganda with a Pati right there in Kampala. And we have communities in China. I mean, it's really amazing to see how it's moved off the computer into these interactions and really being able to help reach out to obscure corners of our world. That to me is just an amazing gift from God personally.
I think there's going to have to be an episode. Maybe we bring one of your partners from Nigeria. I'd like to explore the Talmud in Nigeria. I'm sure.
For sure. Fascinated. Well, can I just add one thing on that? I've just received a grant. I'm not allowed to mention the name, but it's an American organization that's providing a grant for one of the 2 communities I work with, that they're going to sponsor the creation of the history of Judaism in Nigeria through the Igbo, which of course will incorporate, Talmudic and all sorts of different references and things like that. But I also just want to point out, which is wild, the names of these communities. Before they knew me, the urban community is called Knesset Baal Shem Tov. And the rural community is Kibbutz Avraham.
Wow.
So if you want to have any of the members from either of these or both of these, and you want to do a thing, dalu, as they would say, which is thank you.
Great. This sounds really interesting. Gedaliah, thank you for coming on the Accidental Talmudist podcast today. It's been great to have you. All the best.